The first rule about introducing quotations is that you need to have an introduction. You can't do what we often call quote plopping. You can't just have a quote that starts your sentence and ends your sentence with no little dialogue tag or other introductory element. We call that quote plopping. Instead, you need to have some kind of tag like Albert Marin states or according to Albert Marin, which is the beginning of your sentence, and then the quote comes in the middle. Or you could have that at the end, but at any rate, the quotation is embedded into some larger sentence that you're writing. Oftentimes we add the qualifications or expertise to your tag. One way to do this is to use an appositive. An appositive is a phrase which restates something that comes before it. So you could say Albert Marin, comma, author of O Rats, comma, states, quote. In this case, author of O Rats is the same as Albert Marin. It comes afterwards and it's set off by quotation marks. Another way of doing it is putting the qualifications before the author's name. You can say, according to historian Albert Marin, comma, and then have your quote. Let's look at a case where adding a dialogue tag before the quotation makes things awkward. Looking at the yellow quotation, it has experts say right in the middle of the sentence. So, if we say, Marin states, estimates vary, but worldwide experts say rats eat or destroy, there's an awful lot of commas in there and it's a little confusing to have both Marin states and experts say. So, we could do this. We could take off the first part and then just start with Marin states rats eat or destroy between 1/5 to 1/3 of the human food supply. The problem with doing that is that now in the original text, rats is in the middle of the sentence, so it's lowercase. But in our new sentence, it would need to be capitalized because it's the first word of some dialogue. We can't just change the original text without showing that we've changed it. So what we do is we put that capital R in square brackets. The square brackets say, hey, this wasn't the original. And so the reader knows that we're kind of picking up in the middle of the sentence, but we're making it the beginning of our sentence. So that's legit. The other thing we could do is we can, instead of saying Marin states, we could say Marin states that, and then use the lowercase r. Let's look at another example that might give us some challenges. I'm using the highlighted part. Rats, as an expert chef, has a slightly musky taste that is not unpleasant. So Marin is quoting an expert himself. And then Marin goes on to say, those who have eaten rat prepared this way, compare it to rabbit. So I've recopied, retyped what's highlighted at the upper right here, and I've highlighted the quotation marks in Marin's text in yellow. If I put the traditional Marin states and then I put this quote, I have a double quotation mark problem. So the first thing I do is I take all of the quotes from Marin that were double quotes and change them to single quotation marks. And then those are the yellow, those stay yellow. And then because I'm quoting Marin, I put what I'm quoting from Marin in red. Those are double quotation marks. So I have single quotation marks within double quotation marks. And now I also have this little bit weirdness where it says Marin states, and then over here says an expert. That just seems a little confusing. There's a lot of commas, a lot of phrases, it's broken up. This is perfectly correct. It's just a little awkward and hard to read. So we could change things around a bit. Another technique we could use is to paraphrase the Marin text and then to quote the expert as our own quote and cite Marin, like this. Some say rat tastes like rabbit. I'm paraphrasing those who have eaten it, compare it to rabbit. I'm changing that to some say rat tastes like rabbit. And now an expert chef says, here's the expert chef's exact words, and I want to change them for Marin. So I'm quoting that expert chef. I have my double quotes around it, and now I'm saying I got this from Marin. When I have this name of the author in parentheses at the end, that means that was my source for this quotation or for this fact or for this piece of evidence, whatever it is. I certainly need to have somewhere either said who Marin was at an earlier point in the text or have a bibliography that lists Marin and the title of the article. But if I've got one of those, I can just put the last name of the author here in parentheses at the end. If you're on a text set kind of argument, like on the SBAR or in a history class, you often can just put source 1 or source 2 here. I'll show you that in a minute. Note when you use the author's last name in parentheses after a quotation that there is no period here, even though there is in the text, but I've moved that to after the parentheses. Here's another example that's similar to the last one, where Marin is quoting an expert, and there's a dialogue tag for the expert in the middle of the quotation, which can make it awkward to put Marin states, or according to Marin, in front of that whole quotation. So I'm going to ask you to pause and write down two or three possible ways of writing this quote in a more elegant way. And if you need to toggle back to the last screen or slide back to the last screen for some examples, do that. When you're finished, continue the video. Here's some ways of doing it. There are several others. Notice that in the first example, I used an ellipsis to take out the words according to one expert. And in the second one, I paraphrased the phrase one expert states, then I put the expert's words with the parenthetical at the end. Here's another example of how to cite one source who's citing another expert source. I was reading an article by Sarah McKibben called Wake Up Call in an education journal. And it was an article about what time school starts and how it should start later because teens need more sleep. And Ms. McKibben was citing a study by the National Sleep Foundation. There's a little footnote here that says number 1, and that corresponds to the number 1 on the orange alarm clock. So she's saying that the orange alarm clock information came from the National Sleep Foundation. Now they're a more expert source on sleep than Ms. McKibben. So I want to make sure my reader knows that where the actual information came from. So I'm going to say, according to a study by the National Sleep Foundation, comma, teens need 8.5 to 9.25 hours of sleep each night. And then I'm going to put McKibben in parentheses because I got the information about the National Sleep Foundation findings from McKibben's article. And notice here again that even though I might have a period after the word night, inside the quotation marks, because I have the parenthetical citation afterwards, I've put the period afterwards at the very end of my sentence. In many types of school writing, such as text set writing in language arts, the Smarter Balanced Assessment, and on DBQs or document-based questions in social studies, the sources are often numbered for you, and it's usually acceptable just to refer to them as source number 1 or source number 2, like these examples here. You can just say according to source 1, or use source 1 in parentheses afterwards as a citation instead of using the name of the article or the author. You do, though, if you're quoting someone from within the article, you want to make sure that you are using their credibility to bolster your argument, and then afterwards saying source 1, so we know where you got it from. You can get a copy of this notebook chart and paste it into your notebook if you want some samples that you can use as you move forward.